Welcome to the Kpopcast. I'm your DJ Peter Lowe, and joining me for this episode, we have indie musician and Kpopcast editor, Jenny.
Hey, hey.
And for this episode, we'll be exploring an undercovered,
underappreciated,
undervalued,
underexposed
genre of music, and that's Korean indie. And to help our listeners appreciate this artistry and the paradigm shift that comes with Korean indie, we're welcoming on our special editor-at-large, Chris Park. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Chris. Tell us a little bit about KoreanIndie.com.
Korean Indie is a site that's been around since 2011, basically just introducing Korean artists from all genres to audiences around the world. And it's not just like artists in South Korea now, it's actually artists around the world who are of Korean descent.
Cool. Chris, give us a day in the life as the editor-at-large. What's your role with the publication?
So my role is actually the owner, so I pay for everything and then do a lot of the social stuff, like social network stuff. I have a day job, so, I have a 9 to 5, and then after hours I do this, and it's basically checking the email, looking on social to see what new bands are doing, what old bands are doing, and finding new music, and then basically listening to music all day long.
When you're getting those emails and when you're looking them over, how do you decide what to cover?
I look at everything. I listen to everything. So anything that anyone submits, I will listen to. That's not to say I will cover it, just because there's some stuff where I don't think they're ready for that exposure. And it sounds kind of, I'm gatekeeping it, but I don't want to put certain artists in front of audiences that I think they need more time and they need more work on what they're doing. And I'll email them back about that usually, saying that, maybe you should take some more time and make some more music and then come back to us, because I just know our audience really well.
Yeah.
That's not an uncommon thing. I used to work with a publication called Weird Canada, and we'd have our own standards for what would be the bare minimum before we would cover someone, which would usually be like a physical release or something like that, just so we can show how serious they are, and then also taste and stuff like that. But it is hard not to feel like you're gatekeeping sometimes. Chris, is there anything else you wanted to promote or share with our listeners?
The newest thing we did was we actually started a Spotify, not really by choice, but it's just a platform everyone's using right now. So we have a Spotify where I do playlists weekly. So new music, what I'm listening to or what I've heard in the past week. So that's if someone's coming brand new to the music genres, they can hear a lot of different styles of music.
That's awesome. We'll provide a link to that in the show description for this episode, so all you listeners can check it out. While we love the manufactured tunes and aesthetics of K-pop, we thought it was important for our listeners to expand their horizons, expand their palettes, and build taste by gaining a sensibility and tease for what else is out there. Thank you for introducing Korean indie for our listeners here today, Chris. To kick things off, one of our listeners, Reginald Woodson, gave us a very astute question to start things off. He asks, what classifies something as quote-unquote Korean indie?
Korean indie is just a term to easily define a style of music. It's like Korean pop, but even that definition is becoming very vague with members from other countries and how different agencies are creating groups. Back when I first started, it was very much this is music from Korea that's not mainstream. That's how it was defined. Now it's not a very good term to use to describe it, but it's just kind of a necessary term. So it's not like Korean indie is just independent music. It's rap or hip hop. It's electronic. It's so many different genres that are umbrellaed under indie because they're not under a huge label.
I see. I mean, in some ways it feels just as nebulous as K-pop or Korean pop because it's overarching in the overall styles of brands. But correct me if I'm wrong, is there primarily a difference between corporate and non-corporate aspects, or is there something else that's really distinguishing in the categorization or way we should be thinking about this genre of music?
I think in general that it's just indie music. It's just like in the US, you don't call it American indie, or in Europe, you don't call it European indie. It's signifier or description that people can easily understand because it's not in the popular country. Like America or Europe defines a lot of these definitions. And if you bring it from outside, then it's like, oh, you have to kind of define what it is. Like Japanese rock is still rock music. It's just rock from Japan kind of thing.
I see. K-indie. Is that term kosher, or should we always say Korean indie?
K-indie was something that was more for like the Twitter universe, because you were limited by character count.
I see.
And also the problem with K-indie is like if you use it on Twitter, it also refers to kindergarten as a hashtag. So it's like it's very hard to use it and not split it. So I just use Korean indie because it's a much more direct term, and we now have 280 characters, so it doesn't really matter anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing. So it's like you can use whatever you want. Just know that you might get kids in your stream if you use K-indie.
Gotcha.
I have a question just about the approach. How are releases handled with Korean indie artists? Like, does it run a gamut from small labels or even entertainment companies, or people doing self-releasing, DIY releasing? I was wondering about that.
So most releases that I know of are done through labels. They're big indie labels, but they're still smaller than anything else. A lot of musicians, especially electronic musicians, they do everything themselves. They release everything themselves because they control everything and they know how to produce and mix and master their music. It really depends now, especially because of the internet. Physical media is still a thing if you're a fan in Korea, but otherwise they're more focused on like digital releases for consumption everywhere, like Apple or Spotify or Google, like wherever you can hear it.
Yeah, got it. Is most Korean indie music based in Seoul, or are there indie music scenes in smaller cities?
Seoul just has the biggest one because most people live there, but there's a big punk community which is in the south. There are small pockets of musicians everywhere. Seoul just has it's like the metropolitan area. Everyone can get connected to each other. Mm-hmm. So everyone just is in Seoul because that's where everything is. And that's kind of the only reason why you consider Seoul kind of the core of the independent scene, because everyone lives there.
Got it.
So Chris, I heard that Hongdae buskers used to be more singer-songwriters, like less idol dance cover teams, and that there used to be more live venues for indie artists to develop. So I was wondering, what venues are there now for indie artists to be discovered? And is there any government funding, a la Hallyu?
And this, by the way, comes from our listener, Bukoy Brown on Twitter.
So it used to be true that there were a lot of buskers. A lot of smaller bands would just get portable generator and hook up amps and play in Hongdae, just like when you're walking down the street. Like when I used to go there a lot, you'd see probably one every 25 feet. And you could see a lot of fans, like grassroots fans around them. I think it was when kind of like Crown Pop started doing their busking everywhere, when they weren't really popular. It showed as another avenue for these idols who weren't popular to kind of get new fans. Mm-hmm. And that became more common. And then as like Pretty Boy style of music, where there's a big visual to everything, really good looking guys singing, became really popular. That became much more commonplace. So all the kind of the bands who used to do that kind of got pushed out because, you have these big groups of people just massing around these big areas where no one else can play. Mm-hmm. As it goes for venues, the problem with venues is rent in Seoul is like astronomically high, and Hongdae itself is getting basically gentrified. And venues, they want to sell these spaces out to like coffee shops or things that are easier to constantly make money. Yeah. So clubs have shut down because of that. And then in terms of money from the government supporting it, a few years ago, there used to be government funding for that, for bands to come and tour. And it's still there. It doesn't exist in the U.S. because U.S. artist visas are so expensive. Yeah. And the ROI on bringing an indie band out here compared to like a K-pop group is so different that I don't think they're putting money into bands coming to the U.S., but they are putting money into bands going to Europe where visas are easier to get, or like Russia or China or Japan. Like they'll go there very easily. But the past like few years, like South by Southwest has been the only event where they'll send independent bands because of all the people that'll be there. And then they have a big, good connection with the people who run South by Southwest.
Yeah, there's a visa exception for international bands that are going to South by Southwest specifically. You can even drive in from Mexico or Canada, and you don't have to have the regular P1 or P2 visa for that.
That's separate and distinct from how do they brand it again? Like the K-pop night out at South by?
They changed the name of it this past year. I know the guy
just to be more exclusive.
Yeah, I know the guy who runs that whole kind of thing. I don't know if he's still like really in charge of it, but I knew the guy who did it before when it was like, there was a tour called Soul Sonic, which brought 3 or 4 bands out. And then for South by, they had like a mix of K-pop and indie bands. And then they split it even more now because, the government's fronting the money for all these people to come over. So they just want to get the best ROI they can.
Totally.
So it's like all K-pop or whatnot.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we had another question from our listener, Kazoo Girl, who tweeted, what are promotional and performance opportunities like for indie artists in Korea?
If you're talking about promotional by drama OSTs or whatnot, they do exist. The terms are not very good for indie bands, unfortunately. Basically because they know big companies can walk all over them just because they have the power to do that. Performance-wise, I haven't seen any indie band that hasn't been kind of brought up by a big entertainment company to perform on the music shows. People will say what was it? CM Blue was kind of K-pop but kind of indie at the time. And I heard stories around that back in the day about their music and stuff. And so there's no reason why they would want to do that. And then there was the big thing way back when a punk band went on a music show and other musicians came on to kind of be the crowd on the stage, and they basically took their pants off on
I've seen
TV.
that clip.
That's the infamous, that ruined it for everyone.
Yeah.
What band was that?
That was Rux. That's and they're still around. They're still a really good punk band, but they just didn't care because they knew it wasn't going to break anything for them, for in artists there.
Yeah. Nothing to lose. Why not?
Well, they lost. I think they lost a lot. I think some of them went to jail.
Real? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Because that was back in the well, that would get censored anywhere, anytime. Still.
Yeah.
It definitely changed the face of Korean broadcasting from that single incident. Knowing the challenges of performance and promotional opportunities, what has the relationship been between artists and supporters?
Every band has fans. There was a band back in the day called 24 Hours, who I think they're inactive right now. They had a huge group of fans. When I was in Korea, if they played a couple shows a weekend, I'd go to both shows and I'd see the same fans singing the same songs, having tons of fun. The bigger bands, there's still tons of fans supporting them. Even smaller bands find the really diehard fans who will help them set up, sell merch for them.
Wow.
K-pop fans here, they're so focused on the actual members, that kind of pseudo relationship they have with their personas. And when I've seen it in Hongdae, they'll bring them water or they'll bring food for them. Very kind of family style support. Yeah,
it's interesting because with K-pop, it almost feels like a service is owed, right? If not from the idols themselves. Oh, you need to give me this, or I'm expecting this merchandise or this experience. And this is to your point, it's oh, let me help you set up and set down. Wow.
What kinds of events are there? And who organizes them? Are they small shows? Are there any indie festivals? Are there promoters organizing these or DIY?
So event-wise, there's usually shows every single weekend from Friday to Sunday, especially in Hongdae. All the clubs will have shows. There are some clubs outside of Hongdae that there's a good punk club called Club Sharp, really underground punk stuff, which I love.
Sick.
They don't release any music digitally, so I only see them through YouTube videos of other musicians I know who go to record it. There are kind of small pop-up shows, and then there's also big festivals. I think Pentaport was this past weekend. Some people do smaller weekend festivals. There's also a thing called Live Club Day it's a small festival for the weekend. You buy one ticket and you can see bands all weekend.
Is that a multi-venue thing? Okay, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
I think every club owner is they're all friends. Everyone's friends. So there's we want to do this and bring people back to why people came to Hongdae, to see art and everything, which kind of disappeared.
Do you think they're going to last much longer?
From my conversations with friends, it's becoming much harder to be a musician. Most of them have day jobs and they're still making music, but as the kind of K-pop becomes more popular and more businesses want other shops or whatnot for these venues, it's that kind of withdrawal of creativity coming in that neighborhood, which is really sad. But there are other spots that are kind of starting. The problem is still the churn of bands is pretty high. So it's bands will do stuff for a couple years and they'll stop. And the new generation isn't coming as fast as it used to be. So it's kind of worrying, Because I know it's not going to die, but I don't think it'll be as prolific as it used to be.
It's difficult without like even a small kind of critical mass of people who are already playing, people who can go to those shows and be inspired, pick up an instrument. And with, as you said, with like spaces disappearing, less physical releases, it gets pretty hard to do that stuff. But just kind of have to hope that art will find a way, I guess.
I think it might be outside Hongdae in the next 10 years. It's going to be in other pockets of places.
Cool.
Aside from going to KoreanIndie.com to learn and discover more, I mean, how can these fans and listeners support these indie artists to keep them going?
One thing is, it sounds contradictory, but don't use Spotify. Basically, they need people to buy their music, not stream it. And that's the biggest thing. I was a holdout for Spotify for so long because of that. So I'd always have links to Apple Music or Google Play or Bandcamp, which they use a lot.
Yeah.
And just say buy their music. Even if it's digital, they'll get some money out of it so they can keep going. At least if that money just goes to their band fund, they'll have something.
Yeah. Kpopcast listeners, take note. For the artists we're checking out today, you should buy their music. So closing this section of the episode off, Reginald had one last second part of his Twitter question, and he asked, who are some Korean indie artists that are quote unquote must listens? And answering that question, we'll dive into the four corners of Korean indie using a model that listener What Will said often employs to introduce music upon friends. He introduces something friendly, something weird, something old, and something new. So Chris, take us away. Introduce us to one of the first corners of Korean indie, something friendly for K-pop or Western audiences.
I chose an artist named Hunjia. She's actually LA-based. She's a Korean who is making music basically how she wants. She released an album called Lineage a couple years ago that was kind of a story of her grandparents. She went to Korea to visit her grandparents, and it has clips of her grandparents talking. And I thought it was kind of the most honest kind of releases I heard in a long time. And she released her new album, Look After August, or early this month. I think it was August 3rd or something. And this is one of the later tracks in the album, but it's basically very kind of pop friendly, I would say.
Yeah.
But it has her perspective 100% on it. And that's why I thought it'd be a good song to start with.
I love it. When I heard it, I was like, whoa, this is soft. It preserves the rawness of her voice, even though there are a lot of vocal effects that are still filtered onto it. And it's got these big, sweeping, reverberant soundscapes. Though it's still Western friendly, I'm entering into the dawn of an entire new genre and a new playing field. So for me, it was a really welcome gateway.
Yeah, there's definitely some twists and turns in the form and with programming that's really interesting. That even though it's singer-songwriter and it's very accessible, vocal style, it's still taking you somewhere interesting that you wouldn't expect from a typical mainstream pop singer-songwriter kind of release.
It's all her influences put into one place, still with the connection to being Korean coming through everything. And she's one of the ones when I kind of got three artists at the same time who I were thinking this is the next generation of kind of Korean artists coming out. Unfortunately, one of them decided to take a break from music, and the other one is still kind of churning her stuff and making music right now, hasn't released anything new. I've heard a little bit of her stuff she's working on, which is really good, but it's kind of waiting to see how she's going to progress from where she started. But I think Hunjia has done an amazing job from where she started.
take us to the next one, Chris. This one was left field, something weird, something different, very unconventional, but I have to confess, I loved it. Tell our listeners.
So something different was I chose a post-rock shoegaze song by one of my favorite bands in Korea called Mods Dive. And the song's called I Am an Evil, which I don't know where the titles come from. Basically, they take you on like an audio journey through that song. And like shoegaze and post-rock is, because usually there's no vocals, they take you on this whole trip just through the music, and it is like ups and downs. There is an actual audio narrative that you'll hear through it, and they don't care about taking their time, which is one of the things I love. Like some of the songs I've heard are like 12 minutes long, and this is perfect 12 minutes long.
It's definitely unapologetic post-rock, that's for sure.
It's so funny, Chris, because like when I was taking notes listening to this, I kept writing and underlining the word journey. In K-pop, there's this thing that we affectionately refer to as the quote-unquote Teddy Park effect, where you'll have like one genre of music like completely mashed into another one, where you've got these two very jarring genres in one song. And this one, it's like, okay, I'm in one place, and then it very naturally flows into another place. And I am so along for this ride. It was my favorite, actually, out of the four that you shared with us. The genre has like tons of bands in it. It takes a lot of influences from like Japanese math rock and rock there, but they've put their spin on it. There's a bunch of different bands who like, there's one band who even takes like Korean traditional music kind of influences in their style and what they make. And then there's the band called Jambanai, who have been in Europe a bunch, who use traditional Korean instruments to make their music. They're just like encompassing everything that is like being Korean in their music and going forward with it. I think post-rock and shoegaze has a very specific audience. It's not for everybody, 100%. I would say that from the beginning. Like, you might like this, you might think it's like waste of time. But I think if you listen to it enough, you'll find a band that speaks to you in that genre. Got it. Well, take us on to the next one. So something classic, an old standby in Korean indie.
So something classic is the song Speed Up Losers by Crying Nut. So Crying Nut is one of the originators of Korean punk in South Korea. They started like mid 90s, and they are still going strong today. They still make music, and they're still one of the most popular bands. They're actually known by a lot of like idols. And the reason I chose this song is actually this song is a really popular karaoke song in Korea. I think it's in a couple movies. When people are kind of really drunk, they sing it.
I can see that.
The chorus is all about everyone singing together. And this is the song that kind of like made them really popular. And it's one of the songs I go back to, and I just want to listen to something that's fun. And if you're going to start with Korean indie, like this is the song that you should first listen to and be like, this is a style of music that didn't really exist that much before, and then they just kind of brought it forward.
Yeah.
I loved this song. I shared it with a few of my bandmates, and we were all like really relating to the energy in it. It's very straightforward, fun, poppy, but like they're doing their thing, and you can't help but love it.
Chris, is there like a specific message to the song? I mean, you mentioned in the chorus that like it's, you know, everyone's singing along, but I feel like it's trying to tell me something. I'm worried that I'm missing it.
If someone like actually knows Korean and they listen to the song, are probably wrong. But I think it's something about like just being young.
Yeah, I get that.
And like how things are like kind of depressing, and like, you know, you have to like just trust in your friends and all that stuff. I think it's basically a song where like when you're depressed and you want to be happy, you sing this song.
Man, this is going on that playlist. Totally. I dig the surf wax guitars, and I think it's in the last chorus, or it's approaching, maybe it's on the bridge for the last chorus, that you start to hear the vocals come in. But prior to that, it feels like the vocals are being shouted, but from a distance, and like everything is being washed up in the power drums and power chords.
I imagine the recording was really cheap because they probably didn't have any money.
It's not a defect.
It does the job. That's all you need.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, and the last one, the last corner of Korean indie that you will just tease for our listeners before they dive deeper.
So it's an artist by the name of Eddie. The song is called Disappearing Ways. I took a break from the site for about a year. When I came back, I put an all call out on our social media for new artists. So I was curious what happened in the year I wasn't around. She sent us an email, listen to her music, and it's basically, to me, kind of like, I think the next wave of female artists, because I think female artists in Korea are becoming much stronger in their voice, just because Korea is a very like male-dominated society, and you know the voice of females is kind of muted in a lot of ways, just how things are presented. And the fact that she did this, and it's a mixture of a lot of different styles, like kind of effects on everything, and she's mixing genres also. And so when I listened to it originally, I was like, oh wow, this is like pretty mature for like an early release for her. And so now I'm curious, like if she can do this as she's building her talents and her skills, what will she release next? Because that's when I listen to music, I always listen to what they send, but then I think about if they move on, what can they do next?
Yeah.
And if this is like the base, like what she does next will be even more amazing.
When I heard this song, I was like, oh, this is good ending credits. So it's so dope. I love the progressive vibe and the melody of both the vocals and the instrumental solos as well. Chris, is this song indicative of the future of Korean indie? Does it allude to anything that we can expect as a genre or more to come?
I think artists in Korea now are just doing what they want. They're not following any more trends in terms of like what they know could probably be popular. They're just doing whatever they want. And I think this is a good example of that. She's still using, you know, the styles that people can recognize, but putting her own twist on it. And I think that's what more people are doing, is putting their twist on their music.
I mean, like if you're a indie musician, you're not in it to trend chase or go for the popularity necessarily. Like you're doing it because you genuinely love the music. You're not going for the corporate bottom line, but you're there to share something because you've got a day job.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Chris, that wraps it up. But, we've got a little bit of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to share or discuss or impart?
I think if you're a first-time listener to Korean music or Korean indie music, you have to have a very open mind from what you have listened to before, especially for like K-pop. I know K-pop now, I don't listen to it as much as I used to, but K-pop is mixing a lot of different styles now.
Yeah.
My K-pop days are like Girls' Generation and like Tiara and all that stuff. Whoever did Abracadabra, which is like way back in the day.
Bright-eyed girls.
Yeah. So I'm like an old like K-pop person when I was listening to it a lot.
Don't say that. We're not that old. Those of us who got into the 08, 09 wave, we're not that old. Don't say that, Chris.
I'm pretty old to be covering music, so.
Okay.
But I think the more you explore, you're going to find the artists that speak to you, just like K-pop artists speak to you. And don't like be discouraged if you listen to something that doesn't make sense or like just has no interest to you, because there's usually some style that's in a song that you'll be able to find in like an indie artist. Not to say it's like one-to-one, but there'll be some aspect of that music that you'll find that might be interesting to you. So it's like, that's what's fun about music, is always about discovery and exploration. So don't just think these 4 songs are the start and finish. Like, I've listened to probably 30,000 songs over my like 10 years of covering music this way. So you'll find something, don't worry.
Well, plenty of gems in that Korean indie sea of music that our Kpopcast listeners should go out, venture, and explore and discover on KoreanIndie.com. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Where can people find you in Korean Indie online?
KoreanIndie.com is a very easy website to know. And all our socials are at Korean Indie, no underscore, it's just one word. And so we post stuff pretty much every day, at least something new every day, depending on what's on YouTube or on, other artists' social media. We'll share it. And if there's any like Korean artist who listens to your show who wants their stuff covered, come to the website, send us an email. The email's there, and you can all listen to it.
Nice. So I'm at DJ Peterlo, and Jenny, where can people find you online?
You can find me at Jenny Please on Twitter and Instagram. It's JenniPlease.
And K-Popular Kpopcast listeners, don't forget to tell us what you learned about Korean Indie. Give us a tweet at the Kpopcast. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Chris.
Thank you.